Juan.
So Darwin sees human beings as a result of evolution by way of natural selection, and that would indicate that what they were, the features that they had, the capabilities that they had, were all in some way or another developed through that process. And what that means is that we should view perhaps everything about the human being in light of adaptation, adaptation to the environment. And again, when it comes to physical things, perhaps that's not so hard to swallow. But when it comes to spiritual or metaphysical things like our intellect and our moral capabilities, or what we usually regard as being metaphysical, it can be, I don't know, challenging at the very least. What about our intellect, our capacity to reason? What Plato said was our most distinguishing characteristic. He says the high standard of our intellectual powers and moral disposition is the greatest difficulty which presents itself after we have been driven to this conclusion on the origin of man. But everyone who admits the principle of evolution must see that the mental powers of the higher animals, which are the same in kind with those of man, though so different in degree, are capable of advancement. Thus, the interval between the mental powers of one of the higher apes and of a fish, or between those of an ant and scale insect, is immense. Yet their development does not offer any special difficulty, for with our domesticated animals, the mental faculties are certainly variable, and the variations are inherited. No one doubts that they are of the utmost importance to animals in a state of nature. Therefore, the conditions are favorable for their development through natural selection. The same conclusion may be extended to man. The intellect must have been all important to him, even at a very remote period, as enabling him to invent and use language, to make weapons, tools, traps, etc., whereby, with the aid of his social habits, he long ago became the most dominant of all living creatures. Well, what has he said there? In a very rough way, he has indicated, claimed, first of all, that animal intelligence and human intelligence are not different in kind. That human beings do not have a different kind of intelligence than other animals. They just have more of it. It's greater in degree. Moreover, that we see that in that gap between human intelligence and animal intelligence, well, was it any greater than the gap between an ape and a fish or an ape and an ant? That is, presumably the ape's intelligence evolved naturally. How did it get so much smarter than an ant or a fish? That may present certain difficulties, but if we agree that the ape became as smart as it is through natural means, then certainly there's no reason to think that we couldn't have become so much smarter than the ape or any other creature by natural means. Claim there that mental faculties are certainly variable and that variations are inherited. I mean, that's more of a contentious claim because the idea is that animals can get smarter. And so we got smarter through our evolution. Idea is perhaps we could breed an animal for intelligence, make it smarter through domestic variation, domestic selection, whatever he calls it. Why couldn't it be that we got smarter? Because being smarter was favorable to our survival and reproduction. So he doesn't really think it's that big a problem to see, like, how can you account for human intellect being so great? I mean, how could that have evolved? Well, if intelligence is variable, and if intelligence is an adaptation, then certainly we can imagine a story of the human species emerging as intelligent as it is by purely natural means, like evolution by way of natural selection. He admits that the question of our moral powers is a bit more difficult. As he says, the development of the moral qualities is a more interesting problem. But he says that foundation lies in the social instincts. That is, if it's a given that there are social species, the social insects being the most social of the social species, but we say that a human being is a social species, that it has social instincts, then we can account for its morality, or our morality, our sense of morality, by combining those social instincts with a high degree of intelligence. So that something like the conscience, he says, could develop just as a combination of those social instincts with a well-developed intellect, that is memory, that is we have a social instinct to actually help others, and we don't help others, then the memory of us not helping others would stimulate a unfulfilled social instinct. There's sort of the origin of guilt. But he doesn't see it as, he sees it as a problem, but he doesn't see it as a paradox. Like, how could we have moral faculties if we develop naturally? Well, if we develop as social creatures, and we also develop as highly intelligent creatures, and the combination of those two things would suggest a moral creature like ourselves. So, it's not a total story here, of course. Philosophers, biologists continued to come up with theories and accounts of how morality, especially, could have developed in a purely evolutionary way. But for Darwin, even though he's just sketching out an answer broadly to that question, how could morality have developed naturally, he surely doesn't think it's unanswerable, or that it somehow creates paradoxical problems for the general theory of natural selection applied to human beings. So quite a different view of human beings from Darwin. The general idea that we did evolve, and the more particular idea that every capacity that we have should be seen, at least at first, as a kind of adaptation, and that would not just be our physical capacities, but also our intellectual and moral ones.